Okay, so welcome everyone to this issue of the seminar of the IAU Working Group on Active B-type stars. I'm here today instead of Alex, who's at a conference, to chair this seminar, and it is my pleasure to welcome André Luis Figueiredo from IAG at the Universidad de São Paulo. André recently obtained his PhD under the supervision of Alex Carciofi, and now he's continuing as a postdoc still at IAG at Universidad de São Paulo. So sorry everyone for the delay, but we are ready to start. So please, André, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Robert, for the introduction and everyone to wait my arrive. So I will present basically the main results of my PhD thesis. That was basically a demographic study of big stars. We analyzed thousands of light curves in targets that are in the Magellanic Clouds. Well, and starting with the Magellanic Clouds properly.
Sorry to interrupt, André. We are missing the bottom of your screen a little bit. I don't know if you can scroll down somehow because it's a bit cut off at the bottom. Okay, is this just me, maybe? Okay, then go ahead. It looks like it's just me. Sorry about
that. It's okay. So the Magellanic Cloud, just going ahead. So the Magellanic Clouds are the nearest galaxies close to our home, and there is some differences between them. SMC, it's by a factor of 10 less massive than the large Magellanic Clouds. It's a bit farther from us and also has a lower metallicity than the large Magellanic Cloud. So both galaxies has a common background, and they make part of a larger structure that is also known as a Magellanic system. And still then can help offer us answer about the best of the best and interaction between those galaxies. And it can be, this information can be somehow recovery from clusters age, initial mass function, and its physical parameters like radius and so on. And those targets also offer us the opportunity to test stellar astrophysics under another metallicity regimes. And this is interesting for big stars also, because since the Magellanic Cloud has so young clusters, we can study the effect of age and metallicity on big stars phenomenon. So focus specifically on big stars. Those objects offer to us the opportunity to study stellar astrophysics under very critical circumstances, like very high rotation rates, for instance. And their disks also allow us to better study the dynamical process involved in those disks. But the link between the star and disk is quite erratic, and we know that most of our knowledge of these stars was built upon individuals' studies of individual stars. So to better understand the big phenomenon manifestation, we need to go to demographics study so we can surpass this erratic limitation. And this is able to us since we saw many photometric surveys come to public in the last years. So, using photometric surveys to study B stars is not some new. Keller and also Magellanic in almost more than 20 years ago was trying to understand it. But since there is a lack of knowledge under the variations we are seeing, the efforts of both of those authors were in the aim to classify these stars light curves within groups with similar variations and so on. So we have the observation, but it's different from understand what we are seeing. So there was a gap between our knowledge of these stars and astrophysics and what were seeing in the epoch. So we saw this gap close in the last years. So I will show a bit of theoretical framework that also is important to the development of this project. The first effort to trying to address photometric variation of these stars was made by Jones in 2018. And 4 years later, Rabois also contributed with those studies using linking edge dust and single bead codes to try to reproduce the photometric variation observed for omega CMA. So here they are trying to reproduce, mimetize this behavior here of decreasing magnitude. But Rabois made some important contributions to the theoretical side. The first one that I would like to outline here is that the VDD is able to reproduce the observed variations of those stars, as we can see here by those red, green, and blue lines that came from the VDD description. The second contribution is to unify shell stars, since they were understood as edge-on B stars. It was clear also to the authors that the disk grows inside out, so B stars has decrease in disk. And the most relevant from this work is that emission in different wavelengths came from different parts of the disk. What I mean with that? For instance, we check the emission, the relative flux of optical emission. We see that most of it comes from the very inner part of the disk, 2 or 3 stellar radii. But when we go a bit further, like in the millimetric, we see that the area of the disk contributing to this emission is almost 20 or 30 stellar radii. So we can track different parts of the disk with different observations, basically. Well, another important understand that is that the viscous time scale, where this quantity, the time scale, is proportional to the physical size of the disk divided by its viscosity, showing that the inner parts of the disk, which make this part of the equation smaller. So the viscous time of the inner part is much lower than the outer part of the disk. So this means that and if there is any mass loss change, the first parts to respond to it is the very inner size of the disk. Combining those two factors, it allows us to say that we can use optical photometry to track mass loss somehow. So these two main factors that allow us to infer this. Another important effect is the mass reservoir effect. It was studied by Goreshi, 2018, where the authors compare two different disk events, and one that is 3 years long feed and another that is feed by 13 years. When we look the photometric variation associated with one of those disks, we see that the dissipation changes basically because the amount of mass contained in the disk is important and affect how the disk dissipates. So the disk somehow has memories of the previous mass loss process of it. So it's important to us to study the disk, have this in mind. That's why I come back to Omega CMA and compare it with a study of the same target, but take into account this mass reservoir effect. We see here, as the best way as possible, the authors try to take into account the amount of mass that was already contained in the disk and use different viscosity parameters to try to reproduce the photometric variation, and they find a good agreement. They could reproduce it. That's why when in the first study, the Karsov 2012 of this star was the first study to determine the viscosity parameter of a B star disk. But at the time, the mass reservoir effect was unknown. So Gurushi take this into account and allowing variable viscosity parameter find for the very same app of Karsov 2012 much smaller viscosity. So that's the importance to us to study the isolated disk events, that how we can track information from mass loss process itself without the contamination of the previous mass loss process affecting the disk. Well, this work was data of OGLE, that is a photometric survey. It has 4 observational phases. The first one is not included in the survey because it was a test phase. And the following phases were composed by different setups, instrumentation setups, and also some small data reductions details. So in a way to try to has as a sample as homogeneous as possible. We do some procedures like cross-matching the light curves across all the 3 phases. We need to offset photometrically because the different reductions procedure leads to small changes in the photometric calibration. So we need to apply a photometric offset. And also we have to remove the outliers that was present in some light curves. Our sample was selected by Menikent and Sabogal. This is what we call the raw sample. It is composed of more than 3,000 light curves from LMC and SMC. 2/3 of it comes from LMC galaxies, since it's larger. And our light curves cover almost 20 years of data. So it's a very impressive data pool we have at our disposition. So just to show some examples, what we have in our V-star sample. Here I show the light curves in the E-band that is has the best cadence, the best coverage in observation, and also the associated color magnitude diagrams. And just showing some details, we see some strange behaviors as we expected to be stars be very variables and erratic. And we see that this lower panel here, we see that the B sample selected by Menikent and Sabogal was contaminated by eclipsing binaries, like this example, and also some light curves that we do not understand very well what is happening. So our since our methodology needs it's based on photometric variability of those targets. That's why we remove light curves like that show this kind of behavior, a flat one or what seems to be an eclipse binary. And we focus on light curves that show variations, especially in brightness, like those ones. We see more well-behaved light curves, but much more intense activity of some of those big stars. Well, in the literature, there are some methodology to approach to those samples. The first one I would like to show is quantitative. The work of Benhart, 2018. As we can see in this example, they analyzed hundreds of galactic B stars light curves and tracking rising and falling times, for instance. And they find a correlation between those parameters. But here it is important to emphasize that this study does not take into account the mass reservoir effect. So those rising and falling time are affected for the entire sample. Another possibility is to go through each target and do the modeling very detailed, like Himlo 2018, where they use the very same data of OGLE with a shorter time window, and using different models try to reproduce the light curves in the I band and in the V band. This allows the authors to extract very precious information like viscosity parameters and other details, but this is infeasible to a large sample as this one we have in hand. So that's why we propose a third possibility, that is a dynamical classification. This is based on the VDD theory. So we use the VDD theory to interpret the photometric variability we are seeing. It has advantage to the other two alternatives, since it's more practical, since we go in each light curve, classify it, in classify its activity, and this allows us to recover some important quantities, and also more practical, more feasible than the model each light curve in detail. So here the models are used as an interpretative key, and that's why I need to give a bit of focus on it. So we use dynamical models to we use these dynamical models to build our methodology. So this model are a simplistic scenario. We have a diskless star that that starts to feed a disk for a time that is build-up time here, and then we let it dissipate 4 times longer than its build-up phase. So this grid parameter is we fixed the stellar parameters, and we want to understand how the build-up time affects the build-up and the density of those disks affect the photometric behavior of the stars. And to do so, we link again the single Bear and H-dust codes, like in the same fashion as Hubble 2012. Well, if we compare the two extreme inclination, in the pollen side and Magellanic side, we see that the inclination has a crucial effect on the photometric signature of a disk emerging. If we see this disk emerging from a pollen point of view, the brightness can increase by a factor of 1 or more, while in the edge-on side, we see the brightness decreasing, and this decreasing is smaller than its pollen signal. So the inclination controls the photometric signature and how fast those signatures are behaving with color. And if we move to the color magnitude diagram, we find a very interesting features on those light curves. Here I'm showing the models for different build-up times, and what are marked by line styles, and for different inclination, which is represented by different colors. We see that pollen stars tends to increase its brightness and becomes redder as the disk starts to be fed. And when it hit its maximum of mass and starts to dissipate, this change becomes to the initial point it leaves. And as we move from pollen to edge-on orientation, these photometric signatures start to change. We see that in some cases this color variation is from the same magnitude than its brightness. And in some point it starts to become the effect of the disk emerging become to decrease its brightness, still making the star to appears redder. And as the disk dissipated, goes back to the initial spot. So this shows to us that we can use color magnitude diagrams to diagnose inclination of big stars, what is fundamental for our methodology. But a natural question that comes from this is how detailed we can recover this information. We can determine the precise inclination um, of those light curves from those core magnitude diagrams. And when we goes to the same parameter, the same dynamical scenario, keeping in this right hand core magnitude diagram, we show the models for disks that are fed for almost 2000 days, but with different base density. And we start to see that um, this behavior starts to become a bit messier. So this shows to us that we cannot recover the inclination in detail of those stars based on this information, but we can basically contrast polon and edge-on stars. This is a very broad concept, but works well for our methodology. Well, with this knowledge about the CMD signature of the inclination, we come back to our targets for our examples of light curves, as I showed before. We see that the first example here show a signature that is very similar to a very long close star. So we classify this first star here as so. The second one, the variation in the CMD goes in a very similar way as we expected for an edge-on star. So this is classified as edge-on star. The same thing goes for the third panel here. We classify it as a polon. But for the last case, besides we have some similar behavior here, the variation is similar to a column. Since we do not have a clear structure in the CMD, we are not sure that this star is a polon oriented one. So we remove stars that we cannot sure identify its inclination. So our analysis go through works for those top three light curves here on the show. Well, we also use photospheric models and to extract more information from our data. A fundamental concept here is baseline. What we can extract information for light curves like this one when we have this kind of feature, a very well-behaved phase, observational phase here. We assuming that is we are looking to the photospheric brightness of the star. So we are saying that this star has no disk in this phase. So this allows us to use photospheric models together with other information to access or to allow us to estimate the especially the mass of those stars. So we also use baseline information for our entire sample and establish a detection threshold where above this limit we can say we have any we can classify photometric variations basically. So now moving to the dynamic classification by itself. And to do this classification, interactive code was developed. So we go through those light curves and analyze it. So we use this code to mark phases where we say to the code that is a baseline, like in this one. We are assuming this phase, the star has no disk. In another class is disk formation, when we see the disk starts to be feeding just after baseline phase. And then the mass loss is turned off and the disk starts to dissipate. That is the best case for us when we see a simpler behavior of turn it on and off the mass loss. For more complex behavior, like in this second light curve example here, we use another class that we call isolated disk formation because the next phase is not a dissipation one. So the mass loss here in this case is turn it on and keep it on for a while without significant changes. And just after this time that we classify this portion of the light curve as a plateau phase, it goes through the dissipation phase in itself. And before it reaches the photospheric brightness again, the mass loss is turned on again. So this is what is happening in this last portion. In the last phase, we see a light curve that has no baseline, so we just see the star turn it on and off the mass loss process. And based on those categories, we can establish some activity metrics. The first one sorry, is the duty cycle. We use this quantity to track the amount of the time the star is losing mass. This we basically combine all the times where there is mass loss. For instance, in this first case, this is happening just for this part. We represent 13% of the slide curve. In the second example, this is happening in this green, pink, and green data. So it's almost 80% of the light curve. And for half of the time of this last example here, there is mass loss because it's happening just when the brightness is increasing in this example. All those three light curves are column oriented. I forgot to mention that. So when the disk emerges, the brightness increases. Well, the second activity metric is the disk duty cycle, basically. We combine all the categories here that there is a disk around the V star. So in this first example, it's happening in the 83% of the time, what is happening in this part and in this portion. For the second example, almost the entire light curve, the star shows a disk. The section is this very short baseline here. And in the last case, this star has a disk for the entire time. So it's never lost its disk. And the last metric is the outburst rate. We basically count the numbers of the turn. We count the number of how many times the star starts to lose mass. So, for instance, in this case, it's happening for just once in this phase here. If we divide by almost 20 years, so this outburst rate is close to it result in this number. In the second example, the mass loss process happens in this phase and in this phase. The mass loss mechanism is turning on twice here and here. So it happened two times, twice as they observed for the first one, and the last it happens 4 times. So mass loss was turned on here, 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 and here. So its outburst rate is a bit larger as the previous one. So based on those activity metrics, we can measure these 3 quantities, those 3 parameters for all light curves in our sample. But for a few particular behavior, we can extract more information. For instance, for light curves that has a baseline information, we can use photospheric models to estimate its mass. And in this top panel show a star that has a baseline and also turn it on and off the mass loss process. So we are looking for isolate disk event. So if we study the metrics of these events for how long the build-up taking to place, the dissipation, how strong is this photometric change, neither of those measurements are being affected by the mass reservoir effect. So we can extract different information for smaller subsets of our sample. So just before showing the main results of this research, I just want to pause a bit and to put in a perspective what we are doing with this work. So removing the binary eclipsing binaries and that light curves that do not show photometric variation, we have a sample of almost 2,000 B stars with 2 different metallicities. We can estimate its activity, and we can study how this activity is affected by stellar mass and metallicity. And we also have the information of isolate events that will provide important information to us, as will be clear in a few slides. So this allows us to access the diversity of the phenomenon which help us to mitigate the act behavior of the B stars manifestation. And it can provide important pieces that help us to compose a larger puzzle. Since B stars can have a more prominent role in the past when the universe was younger. Additionally, B stars has a connection with binary stars, and also can affect the production of chemical elements when they leave the net sequence. And this can help us to understand if they, for instance, affect some cluster astrophysical, for instance, imbalance the blue and red supergiant observed on those clusters, in some clusters. B stars can also be behind the extended turn-offs observed in some clusters, and also the split band sequence observed for some of those targets. And this is important because here we meet again the Magellanic studies, since people from cluster is trying to understand what can affect those, can produce those effects observed in Magellanic Clouds. And here B stars can has impact on the manifestation of these characteristics. Well, now finally, arriving at the results, I will outline the main contributions of this work, but we explore another possibilities, but I think everyone is here to listen what is the main contributions of this result of this project. So here I am outlining that we are comparing samples of the different metallicities. Since LMC basically is twice larger than SMC, we use the normalized counters to be able to compare appropriately those samples. So if we, for instance, study the number of outbursts per year observed for those stars, the number, the median value represented by those dotted lines, dashed lines here, we find similar numbers. And in the right side of this plot, we also show the cumulative distribution function that's represented by those dotted lines here. We see that SMC targets are more show lower outburst rates than LMC sample. So it's important to mention that make clear that the outburst rate in both samples are quite similar. And if we use the Komarov-Smirnov test, we find that we can say the behavior of those samples are different in using the statistic arguments. Well, here another important contribution is to find that the duty cycle, or the amount of the time those stars spend losing mass, is larger for SMC stars than LMC ones, and by a factor of 1.5 or less. The distribution is clearly very alike, and showing that the SMC are much more actively losing mass. And again, we can say that the behavior are different using KS test. Focus now on what focus on the subsample for which we can infer mass. We compare here the baseline phase of our light curves with what we expected to be this class star, and we see a good agreement between what we observe and the expected region where it falls. So, okay, it makes sense what we are doing here. But when we goes to the SMC sample, since its statistically is smaller, the agreement between models and the data is a bit worse. So it's important to say that LMC measurements are more, we have more confidence in the results for LMC sample than SMC, since there is a better agreement between the models and the data. So also to evaluate it better, I show a histogram of the mass of each sample in different metallicities. We see that for SMC sample, a very strange massive stars excess here. And to compare with what was expected from the literature, we combine the EMF information with the fraction of B stars observed for some particular clusters. So we can compare our population, our samples, with the expected populations. So for instance, the LMC sample is in good agreement with this purple line here that shows what we should expect if we use the fraction of B stars found by Marta in 2006. But what is clear, the SMC, the agreement is not so good if we compare with Navarrete results or Navarrete B star fraction. We expected to has a peak here around 6 stellar mass, and our sample is has an excess of massive stars, what is clear by this peak and also by our entire sample. And if we compare with also the fraction estimated by Marta in 2007, there is the agreement is even worse, right? So emphasize that LMC sample results is more confident and should translate it in more confident results to us. Well, when we contrast different mass beams, what we are showing by those box plots here, we see that there is a mass effect in both metallicities for LMC and SMC targets. More massive stars tend to show a larger Bird cycle, so they spend more time losing mass. But we cannot see a clear correlation or contrast between both metallicities. And since the SMC statistically is low, we cannot infer that there is important metallicity impact on those measurements here. Going to another activity metrics, the disk cycle, we see that also massive stars tends to keep their disks for longer times. So almost 80% of the time of more massive stars has disk. More massive stars tend to harbor disks for longer, around 8% of the light curve time. and we go to less massive siblings, we see that this fraction falls for almost half of the light curve time. When we stud the outburst rate, we also see a strong correlation with mass, showing that massive stars are also more active. So more frequently, those stars turn it on and off the Maslow's mechanism. And this has a strong impact on this outburst rate, since if we compare the most massive and less massive population, we see a factor almost 3 in the manifestation of the outburst rate. Another important result is that when we study isolate events, the amplitude of those events is much more larger, almost by a factor of 2 for SMC stars, showing that lower metallicity favor stronger signatures, or what we can translate to denser disks, and the LMC counterpart of it. And we not see a strong correlation with mass. If we now look for how long those disks exist around those stars, we see that less massive stars tend to harbor longer disk events. So using our sample of 600 isolate events, we find that the duration of those disk events drops as we go from lower to high mass population. And there is an important effect of the metallicity also, showing that a lower metallicity favors also longer disk events. So, for instance, so that's it. We find also a very curious thing. We call it very long bumps, some disk events that last for basically almost 20 years, what are shown by those outliers here. And the most prominent case of it is a disk event that lasts for almost 7,000 days. It was fitted by almost 2 years and spent the rest of its time dissipating. So are disks that take very long between its fit and the complete dissipation. Well, when we contrast, compare the build-up and dissipation time, as we show in this scatter plot here, we want to explore if those quantities has a correlation. And to help our eye here, I'm showing this red line, the identity line, and the different metallicity samples are shown by different colors, LMC in purple and SMC in yellow. So we find that there is a correlation to moderate to strong if we use Pearson coefficients. And we find that this correlation can also be explained by a power law, basically. So my final remarks are that this study contributes contributes with the largest sample of photometric data of B stars. So we have more than 1,500 stars with more than 20 years of light curves covered with the sample. So our activity metrics should be taken as upper limits, since our sample is biased toward the most active B stars. So those quantities should be faced like upper limits. So the effect of mass is also very clear in our results, showing that higher mass star tends to show larger Dutch cycle, disk Dutch cycle, and also outburst rates. But the events are smaller and shorter. When we look the metallicity effect, it's interesting that besides the outburst rate is quite similar, low environments favor longer the cycle and disk the cycle. Beyond that, those events has a strong signature or density, a higher density, and those disks are longer lived. So we find a formula correlation between build-up and dissipation times, what was somehow expected, since disk events that are longer feet should take longer time to dissipation also. And the main contribution also of this work is to develop a tool that enable us to analyze hundreds of light curves. And this will also be applied to another photometric dataset as TESS and CALT, what is in developing. And this has a very connection with hot science that is expected to be done with LSST. And so I take this opportunity also to make a propaganda. Alex Pershoff, that was my advisor, has a postdoc fellowship to work with the stars in the LSST data. So if you have interested in develop a project in this context, contact him. And here I thanks everyone for the space, for the time, and and for again, I would like to uh, say I am sorry to arrive a little late, but I had some technical issues. So thank you very much, and here is my contact also. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Andre, for this interesting seminar. It was a bit longer than expected, but we still may have maybe 10-15 minutes for some discussion. So if anyone has any comments or questions, you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Okay, maybe I can ask a quick question first. So I would be interested, I guess it's a bit of a difficult question maybe, but many of BE stars are close binaries, as you know. So would there possibly be a way to see from the shape of the light curves of these BE stars, which have dissipating and growing disks, to maybe see some signature of binarity in those light curves? Like, would it look, how different would it look for a close binary than for an isolated star?
Yeah, we expected do not see binary signatures since we are dealing with visible photometry and IAS emission in the context part. It's the best observable to track mass loss. So we are looking the very inner part of the disk. So to recover information about binary and signature, we should have a very dramatic case where the inner disk of this star is impacted by tidal interaction with a binary companion. So far, we do not expect to see a binary signature on those visible light curves. Unfortunately, would be amazing to access or to search binary signatures in such large sample.
Okay, thank you very much.
Welcome.
So please, someone else, any questions or comments? You can also type your questions into the chat if you want. Okay, looks like no one else has any comments or questions. So thank you everyone for attending this seminar, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Robert.
And thank
See
you,
you.
André, again. See you.